I stood at the edge of my living room, the golden light from the chandelier dancing across the artisanal rug. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach, at 35 years old. I had hosted dozens of gatherings in our suburban Atlanta home. But tonight felt different. My husband Michael had insisted on an intimate dinner with only our closest friends. He seemed jittery all afternoon, making me wonder what awaited when the guests arrived. Michael reappeared beside me, adjusting the cuff of his crisp white shirt. His dark hair caught in the warm glow as he leaned close and whispered that everything would be perfect. Despite his reassurance, my pulse quickened. Our engagement ring lay heavy on my left hand, symbolizing years of shared memories, quiet breakfasts before work, late-night drives down Peachtree Street. And the way he laughed when I told him one of my terrible puns. Tonight, however, I sensed a shift in the air. By 7 o'clock, our friends had gathered around the round oak table in the dining room. The table was set with linen napkins, mother-of-pearl utensils, and wine glasses that caught reflections from the candles I had placed in handcrafted holders. The scent of rosemary roasted chicken mingled with fresh basil and tomato from my homemade bruschetta. Laughter rose in soft waves as glasses clinked together. Yet in Michael's eyes I noticed a hesitation, as if he carried a secret to share. The final course had just been cleared when Michael stood up and tapped lightly on his wine glass. The room fell into a hushed expectance. I watched him, noting how his hand trembled only slightly. He looked around the table, his gaze lingering on each face. Then he raised his glass and said, "To us," in a voice that wavered between pride and vulnerability. Our friends repeated the toast with smiles, and I lifted my glass, ready to echo his sentiment. But as our eyes met, I saw something in Michael's expression, a fleeting shadow of guilt that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. My heart tightened. I remembered the text message I had found earlier that afternoon. The one from Emily that arrived on Michael's phone when he thought I was on a conference call. The text read, "I can't wait to see you tonight," and it shattered the trust I thought our marriage was built on. I carefully placed my glass at my lips. I let the moment hang between us, tasting the bold notes of the Cabernet Sauvignon on my tongue. The room was silent except for the soft crackle of the fireplace behind me. My breath steadied as I weighed my choices. I loved Michael fiercely. We had built a life together filled with small rituals that felt safe, yet betrayal tastes like rust on the tongue. And I couldn't let him pretend everything was fine. My gaze drifted toward our guests, who waited expectantly. Memories flooded my mind. The day we said our wedding vows under the Spanish moss in Savannah. The road trip to Asheville where we danced by the Blue Ridge Parkway at dawn, and quiet evenings, watching classic films in our den. In each memory, he had been my partner, my confidant. But tonight, I felt as though we were actors in a scene we no longer believed in. I swallowed the last sip of wine and set the glass down with deliberate care. I rose from my seat, smoothing the front of my silk blouse. A hush settled over the table as Michael's smile faltered. I could practically hear the question in his eyes. "What are you doing?" I took a deep breath and raised my own glass. My voice was steady, louder than I expected. As I said two unexpected truths, the words held more weight than I had intended, and I saw confusion ripple across every face. He cleared his throat, as if preparing to speak, but I held up a hand. I continued, "To the courage it takes to face the hardest parts of our lives, to the moments that force us to choose honesty over comfort." I looked directly at Michael, who sat frozen mid-toast, the wineglass poised inches from his lips. My heart pounded, but my voice did not waver. "Tonight," I said softly, "I want to toast someone else." My friends exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from polite curiosity to alarm. Michael's hand dropped to his thigh as his face lost color. The crackle of the fire felt thunderous in the stillness. I raised my glass a notch higher and spoke his mistress's name. The single syllable landed in the air like a stone thrown into a quiet pond. Silence stretched so long I felt certain someone might scream. Michael's jaw clenched and unclenched as he processed what had happened. My throat felt dry, but I refused to blink. I remembered the messages, the late nights. He couldn't explain. The perfume scent on his collar that belonged to someone else. I had rehearsed confronting him so many times in my mind. None of those rehearsals captured the shock in our friend's eyes, or the way Michael looked as if he might disappear right through that dining room floor. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. Marking each second of unbearable tension, my breath came in slow, measured counts. With deliberate calm, I lowered my glass and let the moment settle like dust over the table. I didn't know what would come next. Would he apologize? Would he deny it? Would our marriage fracture beyond repair? All I knew was that I had reclaimed a piece of my dignity with that toast, and nothing would ever feel the same. I felt the silence press against my eardrums like a physical weight, the kind that makes your chest ache. My friends' forks hovered midair. Their eyes darted between Michael and me as though they were watching a tennis match and didn't know which side to root for. The candles flickered, casting long shadows across the table, and for a moment I was certain one of my dinner guests would scream or burst into tears. Instead, Michael drew in a deep breath, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. The wine glass in his hand trembled, droplets sliding down the crystal, as if even the wine itself couldn't stand the tension. Finally, Michael let the breath out in a shuddering rush. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and then forced words past his lips. "Hannah," he said, but his voice came out rough, uneven. "I can explain." His eyes flicked to our friends, then back to me. Guilt and something else, shame, maybe flickered in his gaze, but I refused to relent. I wanted authenticity, not excuses. I wanted him to look me in the eye and admit he had betrayed our vows. I wanted him to suffer the way I had. Betrayal pounding through my veins, I stood up from the table, the hem of my skirt whispering across the chair. "Please," I said, my voice low but carrying across the room. "Save it." The room felt too small, too hot, every breath tasting like regret. I turned away from the table and strode toward the sliding glass doors, leaving Michael blinking. In the candlelight, the backyard beyond was dark, lit only by the moon peeking through a thin veil of clouds. I slid the door open and stepped onto the patio, the cool night air wrapping around me like a comfort I hadn't realized I craved. I leaned against the railing and closed my eyes, tasting the night. Crickets chirped in the undergrowth, and a soft breeze tugged at a stray lock of hair. Inside, I heard the chair scrape as Michael got up. I waited, not daring to hope he would follow, or that he wouldn't. After a moment, he stepped onto the deck, his shoes tapping on the wood. He stopped a few feet away, hands shoved deep into his pockets. I opened my eyes and saw him silhouetted against the glow of the kitchen light, shoulders slumped. He exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry," he said, but his apology sounded like an echo of one he had practiced. Sitting beside me on the railing, he didn't meet my eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," he added. "It just happened." My heart lurched. Nothing about his words conveyed the responsibility he needed to own. "It just happened," I repeated softly, turning to face him. His gaze flickered to my face, and I realized that beneath his shame was fear of losing me. I pressed my palm against the cool wood and let the breeze dry the tears I hadn't noticed sliding down my cheeks. "You know," I said, voice steadying, "when I found those messages, I felt like my world tilted off its axis. I've spent the last few hours replaying every moment, wondering when you stopped choosing me." He flinched, eyes darkening. "With remorse, Hannah, please believe me, I still choose you." His hand trembled as he reached for mine. I jerked my hand away. Shock registered on his face. I stood and turned, pacing the length of the deck as the moon crossed behind a cloud. "If that's true," I said, "you'll prove it." I stopped and met his eyes, not with words, with actions. Because right now, words mean nothing. I thought of all the mornings he'd kissed me awake, the nights he'd held me while I cried over deadlines at work, the way he laughed when I danced barefoot in the living room. I wanted to honor those memories, but they felt tainted by every lie I'd uncovered. Michael stood and came closer, his voice urgent. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. I hesitated. Did I really know? I wanted the truth laid bare, and I wanted him to choose me publicly, to stand up to whomever Emily was and tell her our marriage was off limits. But more than that, I wanted space to think, to figure out if I could forgive him. "I don't know yet," I admitted. My admission was like dropping a stone in still water. Ripples spread across his face. "Right now, I need time to breathe, to understand if our life together can survive this." He reached out again, tentatively, and this time I let him take my hand. His fingers closed around mine, awkwardly warm. "I'll do whatever it takes," he whispered. I nodded, my throat thick. I wanted to believe him, yet I also feared that this was only the beginning of a longer battle, one where trust had to be rebuilt from broken pieces. We stood in silence, holding hands on the deck, letting the night surround us in a fragile bubble. Eventually, I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. It was Sarah, our dearest friend. Her eyes brimming with concern. She'd followed me outside when she saw Michael slip out. She stood at a respectful distance, but her presence felt reassuring. "Do you need anything?" she asked quietly. I managed a small shake of my head. She understood more than words could say. She squeezed my free hand and slipped back inside, closing the door softly behind her. Alone again with Michael, I inhaled deeply, tasting salt on the breeze. "I need to figure out who I am outside of this marriage," I said even as the words escaped me. I felt their truth. For years I had defined myself as Michael's partner, a wife dedicated to building a shared life. Now I realized I had lost sight of my own footing. "I need to find my center again," I added, his grip tightened on my hand. We stayed on the deck until the moon slid away and the first pale pink of dawn crept over the horizon. In that quiet hour, I made a vow to myself. I would not be defined by his betrayal, nor would I forgive without reason. I would rediscover my strength, piece by piece, and only then decide whether our marriage was worth saving. As the birds began their morning chorus, I closed my eyes and let the new day wash over me, uncertain, fragile, but full of possibility. This was where part 2 of our story ended, and where my journey truly began. I woke to the scent of coffee drifting through the open bedroom window, sunlight slanting across the white comforter like a promise of renewal. The world outside had begun its morning symphony, birds calling, distant traffic humming, the neighbors' sprinkler whispering against the lawn. I lay still for a moment, tracing the pattern of light and shadow on the sheets, and felt the ache in my chest soften slightly. Last night's vows, my vow to myself, his vow to try, floated through my mind. I realized that healing would be neither swift nor linear, but as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, I welcomed the challenge of rediscovering who I was. Beyond the confines of our marriage, over a cup of dark roast on the back porch, I opened my journal and let my pen spill every fear and hope onto the page. I wrote about the sting of betrayal, the sharp taste of grief, and the small flicker of determination that life would not break me. As I wrote, I planned my day: a therapy appointment at 10, lunch with my sister Emma at our favorite bistro, and then a quiet afternoon to explore a pottery class I'd signed up for before Michael's infidelity surfaced. Each decision felt like a brick in rebuilding my foundation, timid perhaps, but solid. At the therapist's office, I sat in a deep armchair, the walls lined with abstract art in soothing blues and greens. Dr. Patel listened as I recounted the dinner party, my confrontation on the deck, and the emptiness that followed. She guided me through exercises in self-compassion, reminding me that my worth was not defined by my husband's choices. I practiced acknowledging my strength aloud. I am more than a betrayed wife. I am capable, creative, and deserving of trust. Saying those words trembled on my lips, but each repetition grounded me a little more firmly in my own truth. Lunch with Emma was a balm to my spirit. We sat at a sunflower yellow table beneath a canopy of twinkling cafe lights. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes fierce with loyalty. We talked about everything and nothing: her new job managing a nonprofit, our mother's upcoming birthday, and for a moment, I basked in the simple joy of shared stories. When I finally told her what I needed, she promised to hold me accountable. Weekly check-ins, impromptu coffee dates, and honest feedback when I needed it. I realized then that my journey to healing didn't have to be solitary. That afternoon I stepped into the pottery studio, the scent of wet clay heavy in the air. My fingers remembered the way clay felt, cool and supple under my palms, and as I coaxed a misshapen mug into form, I felt an unexpected release. The wheel spun beneath me, and with each rotation I let go of shame and self-doubt. When I finally stepped back to admire my lopsided creation, I smiled at its imperfections. It was uniquely mine. Flawed yet beautiful, I left the studio clutching the still wet mug, a tangible symbol of the growth I was forging, one slow turn at a time. That evening, Michael arrived home with a tentative bouquet of daisies and apology spilling from his eyes. He found me on the back porch, painting small buds on a canvas table my father had given me years ago. He asked if he could sit, and I nodded without turning. When he settled beside me, he spoke in a quiet voice. "I know I have a lot to prove. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm committed to earning it, day by day." I painted a petal in silence, then spoke. "Actions over words. I need transparency. I need you to let me into your world again." He nodded, meeting my gaze for the first time in days, and I saw in his eyes a genuine longing to rebuild. In the weeks that followed, we established new rhythms, shared morning walks where we talked about our individual goals rather than household chores, weekly check-ins where I voiced my feelings and he listened without defensiveness, and a couples workshop on communication that left both of us teary but hopeful. When he answered my calls promptly, joined me at therapy when I asked, or simply sat in companionable silence without scrolling through his phone, I felt trust begin to root itself tentatively between us. Progress came in small victories, a promise kept, an apology unprompted, a moment of vulnerability without backpedaling. Simultaneously, I rediscovered passions I'd shelved. I returned to writing short stories inspired by my childhood in Savannah, and I volunteered at the local food bank, where giving felt like a salve for my wounded heart. I reconnected with old friends over wine and board games, and I took weekend hikes in the Blue Ridge foothills, marveling at the way the mist curled around trees at dawn. Each experience reminded me that my life encompassed far more than marital pain. It brimmed with possibility, wonder, and the steady hum of my own resilience. 1 month after the dinner party that upended everything, Michael and I sat at that same oak table for dinner, this time without guests, without fireworks of accusation. He reached across, took my hand, and said simply, "I choose you." Every day, I looked into his eyes, saw the sincerity there, and felt the answer settle in my bones. I raised my glass of herbal tea and toasted to new beginnings. As we sipped, the tension that had once knotted my shoulders eased into a gentle warmth. I knew this was not the end of our challenges. Trust once broken requires constant care, but in that moment, I believed in us again. Later, as I climbed into bed, I reflected on how far I had come. I had stared down betrayal, reclaimed my voice, and forged a path toward forgiveness that honored my worth. My heart still carried scars, but they were reminders of my strength, not of my failure. I drifted to sleep under the soft glow of the moon, content in the knowledge that life's most profound transformations often emerge from its darkest hours, and that I, at 35, was only just beginning to write the next chapter of my story.